Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And no doubt the title is a bit of a clue. Today we are talking about the execution of Anne Boleyn. So I will be laying out the events from the preceding months, the things that arguably led up to her execution. But principally, I'm interested with attempting to find an answer to the question of just why Henry VIII chose to import an executioner to dispatch his second wife. Why is Anne Boleyn the rare figure in English history to be put to death by sword? This is not a traditional method of English execution, so why was this step taken? Let's look at it. At the start of 1536, Anne Boleyn had been married to her husband and king, Henry VIII, for around 3 years. Despite this length of time, there were many who still did not support the marriage. In Europe, they felt it was invalid, that he was still legally married to his first wife, and there were many in England, although perhaps more privately, who seemed to have felt the same. So on the 8th of January 1536, an event took place that would arguably change everything. There are many who claim that this event sets in motion the things that would catastrophically alter Anne Boleyn's future. Certainly, it changed the political landscape in England. On this date, Anne Boleyn's predecessor, her arch rival, Catherine of Aragon, first wife of Henry VIII, passed away at Kimbolton Castle. For those who were more conservative at Henry's court, this was a landmark watershed moment. They had, I think, perhaps come to terms with the fact that Henry would not put Anne away while Catherine was alive. He did not want to return to his first wife. He also, therefore, had no interest in returning to loyalty to the Holy See of Rome and the Pope. If they would not support his separation from Catherine of Aragon, his marriage to Anne Boleyn, then he wanted no truck with them. What Henry wanted was a boy. But both Catherine and Anne had so far failed to do this. But with Catherine's death on the 8th of January, perhaps he wouldn't have to. With the Conservatives and arguably the Pope recognising his first marriage as valid, Henry was now a widower. All he needed to do was be convinced to put Anne away, perhaps make a new marriage, just the kind of marriage that would have the papal blessing that would give him the son and heir that he so desired. Maybe the Conservatives could have everything they wanted, a return to Rome and also a Tudor royal male heir in the cradle. By the end of January 1536, Anne Boleyn must deal with her own tragedy when she miscarries a baby. Henry VIII had used Catherine of Aragon's recurrent miscarriages and stillbirths as evidence that God was displeased with their marriage. Is it possible that Henry couldn't have been thinking the same thing about Anne Boleyn? And even if he wasn't, is it really conceivable that Anne Boleyn would not have been concerned that he was thinking this way? This was not Anne Boleyn's first recorded miscarriage. And I think it's highly likely that at this time her grief at the loss would have mingled with quite a large dose of fear and paranoia. Fear and paranoia that her husband might turn away from her because he thought she could not give him a son and heir. Perhaps that his head might be turned by another lovely young lady at court. She would have been aware that the Pope and Conservative factions never recognised their marriage. With Catherine's death earlier in the month, for them, her husband was a widower. While it's of course impossible at this far a historical remove to know exactly what Anne Boleyn was thinking, I think it's highly likely that in at least the days following this miscarriage, she would have been desperate. However, while I stand by the fact that in the aftermath of this miscarriage, Anne Boleyn would have been grief-stricken and probably a little scared, I don't think that means that she's broken. And indeed, possible evidence for this, for her rallying from this miscarriage, is shown a few months later. If she is the one behind the events of April of that year, then she is taking risks. She is aggressive and decisive. And if she is the one behind it, then it would seem apparent to me that she is absolutely sure of Henry's love for her, of her own place as his wife and queen. On the 2nd of April 1536, an event takes place that many historians have taken to be evidence of a rift having formed between Anne Boleyn and the King's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell. It is believed at this time that Anne Boleyn instructed her almoner, John Skipp, to deliver a castigating sermon about evil counsellors. The sermon referenced Haman, an evil counsellor from the Bible. It was a thinly veiled reference to Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell, like his biblical counterpart Haman, is being set up as an evil counsellor to his king, in opposition to their good queen. But why is this moment relevant to the fall and execution of Anne Boleyn? Indeed, is it? Well, it only is if we accept that Anne ordered Skip to give this sermon on this very topic. If we accept that Anne Boleyn was the prime motivator behind this sermon being delivered in the form that it was, and that that is also how Thomas Cromwell read it, then it looks like he saw it as a declaration of war, and he wasn't going to go down without a fight. Like Anne Boleyn, he was prepared to move decisively, and with lightning speed. Within the month, on the 30th of April 1536 to be exact, he arrested Mark Smeaton. He took him to his house where he questioned him. Some say that Smeaton was tortured. In the aftermath, Smeaton had confessed to criminal congress with Queen Anne Boleyn. He said that they had committed adultery together. After this confession, it took just 19 days for a queen and 5 men, one her own brother, to be arrested, tried, convicted, and executed. From this interpretation, it is Thomas Cromwell that is the prime mover, deciding to bring Anne Boleyn down in order to save himself. He is the mastermind of a coup that Henry VIII simply falls in line with perpetrating. A counter to this reading is, however, that it relies on Henry VIII being persuaded or convinced to do away with his wife due to external forces, namely Thomas Cromwell. Many historians find this interpretation problematic. They feel that it underestimates Henry VIII, his rule and his singular force of will. On the 1st of May 1536, the royal court was celebrating May Day. There was jousting at Greenwich. At some point, Henry brought festivities to a close early. He left Greenwich, riding towards London. He took with him one of his gentlemen, Henry Norris. It is claimed that en route, Henry VIII turned to Norris and asked him to confess to adultery with his queen. Norris refused. He was still arrested and placed in the Tower of London. The next day, the 2nd of May 1536, saw Queen Anne Boleyn and her brother, George Boleyn, Lord Rochford, likewise being arrested and sent to the Tower of London. Within a week, they were joined by 4 others who were also accused. They were Francis Weston, William Brereton, Thomas Wyatt, and Richard Page. For Thomas Wyatt and Richard Page, their arrest and imprisonment in the Tower of London marked the end of their journey towards prosecution. Both men would be released in 1536. They were the lucky ones. For those accused with them, they would not be so fortunate. On the 12th of May 1536, the first trial took place. This was the trial for the so-called commoners: Norris, Smeaton, Brereton and Weston. The allegations against these 4 men were put before a jury. They were tried and found guilty of treason and condemned to death. On the 15th of May 1536, it was the turn of Anne Boleyn and her brother George to face trial. As they were ennobled, they were tried separately from the commoners before them. They were to be tried by a jury of their peers. The accusations against them would be heard at the Great Hall in the Tower of London, which no longer stands. It is highly unfair that this trial took place 2 days after the former trial where those 4 men were found guilty. Because if those 4 men were guilty, then surely Anne Boleyn's own guilt was a foregone conclusion. And certainly it seems that it was. Anne and her brother George were unanimously found guilty by those peers, and they were sentenced to death. 2 days later, on the 17th of May 1536, all of the men convicted alongside Anne Boleyn would go to their execution. They were taken from the Tower up to Tower Hill, where a scaffold was erected for the purpose. There, they placed their neck on the block, one after another, and were beheaded by axe. The next day was the 18th of May 1536, the day that Anne Boleyn believed she was to die. When she woke that morning, she expected that she would prepare herself, she would pray, and then she would be collected at around 9 a.m. in the morning from her rooms in the Tower. She would be escorted to the scaffold erected for the purpose, and there she would meet with the specialist executioner sent from Calais, the swordsman. Before him she would kneel, and, blindfolded, she hoped that he would part her head from her shoulders at a stroke. But this was not to be. There was to be another delay, because the swordsman had not arrived. He would not arrive until midday. Anne Boleyn's execution would have to be postponed to the following morning. On the 19th of May, 1536, all occurred as Anne had thought it would occur the previous day. She was collected from her rooms, escorted to the scaffold, where she met with the swordsman. There was to be no further delays, and no reprieve. Edward Hall gives an account of what Anne Boleyn said on the scaffold as follows. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul." At this point she was blindfolded, and kneeling upright she is said to have repeated several times, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesu, receive my soul." As promised, Anne Boleyn was beheaded with a single stroke. We could discuss, or rather argue for days, about what the actual cause of Anne Boleyn's fall was, or who the actual cause was. But as I said at the start, what I wanted to talk about in this video was why Henry chooses to import an executioner for Anne. Why is she beheaded by the swordsman of Calais, when everybody else accused with her meets with the block and axe? As strange as it might sound, execution by axe on the block was a privilege in England, reserved mostly for the nobility. However, that doesn't mean that it was a particularly clean or precise way to kill somebody. While the sword is designed to do that job, it is a cutting weapon. The axe relies on its weight. It's a crushing injury. The blade, as sharp as it can be, is still relying on the weight of the handle and the rest of the metal blade to take it through a neck. It's also worth bearing in mind that if it's been a while since a noble was last beheaded, then the executioner might not be in practice. They might get themselves drunk the night before, or even the morning of, for some extra courage. So you may have an inexperienced, hungover or drunk executioner trying to use a fairly poor crushing weapon to take your head off your shoulders. So does this go perhaps some way to explain why Henry VIII chooses to import a swordsman from Calais to deal with Anne Boleyn? The woman who, at least for a time, he appears to have loved beyond reason. Is he simply horrified at the thought that she might have to suffer unduly on the block with the axeman? Or is it more pragmatic than that? Henry knows that even within the Tower, where you can control who comes in, there is going to be an audience for this. Anne Boleyn was the first Queen of England to ever face execution. Henry simply cannot have this turn into a PR disaster. If it went wrong, if it took more than one blow, if it was a bodge job, so to speak, it would perhaps look even worse and be even more embarrassing for him than it already was. Alternatively, and perhaps even more unpleasantly, can we read the choice to bring over a French executioner as Henry attempting to mock Anne Boleyn? Anne Boleyn had spent a number of years during her adolescence and early womanhood growing up in France at the French court. So much so that when she came back to the English court, there were many who said you would have taken her for a Frenchwoman born. Her French was perfect, and she revelled in French fashions. And it seems that she felt an affinity for France all her life, and perhaps also for the French court. The French court, in English minds, or at least in many English minds, was synonymous with promiscuity and licentiousness. So here we have an English queen who grew up in France, who is accused of treason, adultery and incest with her own brother. Is Henry VIII making a jibe at her French upbringing? Is Henry choosing to end her life in this French manner because, as far as he was concerned, she lived far too Frenchly in the first place? Many take issue with the fact that Henry orders this swordsman from France and that he is able to arrive, even a day late, but still on the 19th of May. They say that this is evidence that he must have been ordered long before Anne Boleyn's trial, in fact within days of her arrest, for him to get there on time. And to them, this is evidence that Henry has turned tyrant. There is not going to be a fair trial because this man has been sent for long before it's even taken place. Well, we all knew that this was really a foregone conclusion. Why else would you try the commoners before Anne and her brother? But I think it's worth mentioning that Anne Boleyn could still have expected a pardon or reprieve. Had Henry so chosen, despite the fact that he'd ordered this swordsman from Calais, if he had changed his mind about Anne Boleyn, he's the King of England. And while I believe that her eventual guilt being declared was a foregone conclusion, sending for the executioner early is not the thing that proves this. Henry VIII is King of England. If the executioner had arrived and Anne by some miracle had been found innocent, or, for that matter, Henry had chosen to pardon and release her, perhaps to a convent, he could have just sent the executioner away, paid him and sent him back to France. Him being sent for doesn't mean that Henry has started the process of Anne Boleyn's execution, which then has no way of being stopped. He is still king. Sending for the executioner, while it feels a little callous to us, is perhaps more about being prepared. One of the side effects, of course, of importing your executioner from France is that crucial day of delay. And depending on how you read that, it's potentially quite telling. Anne Boleyn wakes up on the 18th of May expecting that the French executioner has arrived and that she will die that day. It's not until later that she's told he's been delayed and that she will have to wait till the following day. Now, if the executioner didn't come from France, that delay would make no sense. And perhaps it's a real delay, an accident that was unavoidable. People do get delayed in transit all the time. But perhaps it was also something that was orchestrated. Anne Boleyn is made to believe she will die on one day, when Henry and or his counsellors know that it will not be to the next day. Was this a callous attempt to break her spirit, in the hope that she might finally confess to what they thought she'd done? But I'd love to know your responses to those queries that I've posed, and also what you think of this video more generally. So let me see your thoughts in the comments section down below, or alternatively you can come and find me over on my social media. As always, links to my Instagram and Twitter will be found in the description box. You can follow me there and we can continue this conversation. I do hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then please let me know by hitting the thumbs up. Please also subscribe to this channel, and while you're there, hit the bell icon that's next to the subscribe button so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.